Coming up, we complete our DTVC Extra look at the Bloodfist series with numbers 7, 8, and 2050. And then next week, we've got Ty and Brett from Come Up's coming on to look at Charles Napier's. We're going to look at our top 5 Napier movies, look at some other facets of Napier's career. So that was a really fun episode, so definitely check that out. Then in 2 weeks, I'm not sure. I'm still trying to debate, if I'm going to maybe do Marvel Phase 1 for the, continue the DTVC Extra series and look at Marvel Phase 1. That's one idea I have. I just recorded an episode with Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and New Horror Express. And that was a really fun episode. We looked at Shadow Man, the Steven Seagal movie. So a really fun episode that we did there. So I was going to probably put that in the natural cadence of the regular series, the every other week from that. So that would probably be like, what would that be, like the 15th maybe? I'm not sure, or the 8th maybe, something like that. Something in that range. I don't know exactly what the date would be, but that's my original plan. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what to, with next year coming. I think I like having the DTVC Extra series. I like having the podcast coming out once a week. I would like to get to a point where maybe I can get a guest on once a week, but that's going to be on me also to sort of like make sure I'm reaching out to people as frequently as possible and getting as many episodes recorded and in the can so that, that we have that going there. That's one idea. But, obviously the DTVC Extras are nice because I don't have to get a guest for those, right? I can just record them myself, so we'll see. And then again, Marvel Phase 1, doing that, I just kind of really like the idea of just those movies. It just seemed like it would be kind of a fun thing to do, kind of get back to my old roots too myself, talking about Marvel movies. Obviously there's been some interesting news with Marvel, obviously over the past couple of days, we found out that Jonathan Majors was convicted of domestic violence and harassment, something along those lines. But at that point, Disney and Marvel cut ties with him. They fired him immediately. And so that kind of leaves things up in the air a little bit, right? Because they had pinned their hopes on him as Kang, right? He was kind of supposed to be like a mix of, the villain of Thanos and the hero of Iron Man, in the sense of like Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., everybody loved him. So he was sort of underpinning everything. They thought, Jonathan Majors would be able to underpin things with his charisma, but then of course be a baddie along the scale of a Thanos. And I guess the other thing I've been reading is that he hasn't, those movies or the new stuff with him in it hasn't been as well received as they were expecting anyway. I think there's sort of the overall fatigue with Marvel. And so it kind of makes you wonder if maybe with what's happened with them this year, with nothing really catching in terms of their films. I think I don't know how many Marvel movies they put out there. So they put Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That was like the biggest one out of them, and still didn't quite pull in 850 million. And then they had the Marvels. They had the Ant-Man movie. I'm trying to think. I thought there was a 4th movie that they had this year, and of course there's no way I'm gonna pull it from memory right now, if there was a 4th one. But anyway, again, they put out that movie. And so I wonder if maybe with this happening at the same time that their properties aren't pulling in that billion number that they used to, if maybe instead of making these $250 million, $300 million big tent projects, if they start maybe breaking things up and sort of start aiming for smaller audiences. Because I think one of the things about the Marvels that I really liked is I just thought it was a good, fun movie. And if you're thinking of a movie like that in more of a small tent or kind of smaller audience idea, the money that it made is actually really good, right? But when it's a $200+ million big tent project, it's got to pull in $1 billion for it to be worth it. And maybe this, now that they of course they had hinged everything on Majors and him playing Kang the Conqueror. Maybe they'll change things. I mean, obviously, it's not going to take much for them to recast Kang, right? They could just put another actor in that place and kind of do like what, the Terrence Howard, Don Cheadle thing, right, with Iron Man, where, somebody new plays the character and we're all none the wiser, right? And not that we really care about that, right? I mean, I personally don't really care that much if they just bring in a new actor and have them play that part. So that would be easy enough if they wanted to keep the story going the way it is, but they could also just rip everything up and say, hey, let's do a different approach here and see if we can get something better here. You think of a movie like Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, the Nicolas Cage film that was, it's essentially a direct-to-video movie made in Romania, but it's a comic book movie, right? And that one had a massive return on investment. I think it made over 150 million, and I think the budget was maybe 50 million, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it was a big return on investment. And, I mean, yes, you go into IMDb and there are a lot of people who are like, oh, this is the worst comic book movie I've ever seen. But, I mean, I kind of love it just because of the unleashed Nicolas Cage nature of it. I think it's a fantastic movie. I'd love to see more comic book movies like that. Just stuff that doesn't have to be the biggest blockbuster thing ever. And I wonder if maybe that's where, Disney and Marvel will start maybe moving in that direction, right? Maybe also with their series, the same thing, right? If we're going to make a series, something like the Luke Cage series was not really a big tent series. And it was, for me, it's my favorite. I mean, obviously I haven't seen a lot of the series, so I can't compare it to all of them, but I thought that's one of my favorite things that Marvel has done. And so, doing more of that kind of thing, doing a Punisher that really only speaks to a smaller audience, I think would be fantastic and a great way to do it. So, maybe this kind of, opens up the door for some new stuff here. But anyway, I kind of like the idea for myself, just being a huge Marvel fan. And I mean, even with the Kang thing, it just brings me back to the mid-'80s. I remember, it's like, I think it's like, I'm 85, 86, something like that. I wasn't that old. But I remember my mom at Woolworths got me the Secret Wars action figures, right? I think I looked it up on Wikipedia because I wanted to remember it. In my head, I thought it was like Kang was sold with Black Spider-Man, but it might have been that Kang was sold with Wolverine. I can't remember, but I just remember that Kang action figure that I had, with the colors and everything, and I just thought he was so cool. And so the idea that they were bringing Kang into the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a baddie was something I was kind of excited for, even though didn't bother to see Loki, the TV show that he was in, or the most recent, Ant-Man movie that he's in as well. But it was just the idea of it, kind of just bringing you back to that nostalgia piece there. And so that's kind of what I like the idea of doing with this Marvel Cinematic Universe, like at least looking at phase 1. I don't know if I'll go through all of them, or if something will change, with me doing the DTVC Extra, but I think that'll be kind of the plan. But again, hoping in the new year, you've got a lot of people to reach out to about being guests on the show, and of course Ty will be back on. We're looking to do a couple John Malkovich movies, which I think will be fun, as we kind of pick back up doing the 2-movie thing that we've been doing there. So fun things to come for sure for next year. And I mean, I think, definitely looking at it being a little bit more than a year on Spotify/Anchor now that we've been on, definitely has been great that I made that move from TalkShoe. I think there's a lot that, the quality of the podcast, just in terms of like the audio and the downloadability and all of that, and even me being able to track numbers and stuff like that has been a lot better. So that piece of it's helped, and it's just been easier to post episodes, which is just so much nicer than what I had to go through when I was doing everything on TalkShoe. So that all kind of helps there for sure. So, kind of looking just to see kind of where that goes next year. But, of course, I'm always happy for suggestions for things that, ideas that people have on where we can kind of take the podcast from here. Definitely always excited to hear that. In terms of the blog, this weekend being Christmas weekend, I can't believe we're already here on Christmas weekend. Doing the Randall Scandal movie, so I've got to get images for that, but I've already seen it, so I'll definitely give you my take on that one, which I think will be good. I think it dovetails a lot with the movies that Ty and I have been watching for those 2 movie episodes that we've been doing together. We've kind of gotten a little bit away from the Emmett Furl Oasis recently, but we were doing a lot of those, and so I think it'll be good to kind of chat about that. And there's a lot in that documentary to unpack, and I'll kind of touch on certain things that I thought were important there. But it's always fun to do that. And then I think the week after, I'm going to try to get Gary Daniels in with Astros, so try to get more Gary Daniels in. I think he's at 58 movies now, so we're closing in on 60 for him, so hopefully we'll get him there soon. And then kind of going back to a previous post, Outlaw Johnny Black, that post is still really just pulling in numbers. It is now by far the, 3 times, I think, at least, the most viewed post since I've come back from hiatus. So I went on, kind of had an unplanned hiatus between 2015 and 2019. When I came back, that first post was Skin Trade, the Dolph Lundgren film, and pretty much I think the biggest post since Skin Trade, since I came back with that Skin Trade post, was I Am Vengeance Retaliation. And that, in part, a big reason why that one got so many views was that, Ross Boyask, the director of the film, he got me a screener of it, and I reviewed it kind of right when it came out. And so, and he, posted links to it and all of that. So, so that one also got a bump, from him. Whereas Outlaw Johnny Black, I just posted it. I can't really see the sources for why it's got so many views, but by far, I mean, it's just been blowing up and still getting a lot of views. So, for people that are checking out the blog, if you've come here to the podcast after checking out the that post, I definitely welcome you. If you want to buy one of my books as well, that would be great too. But definitely, welcome and happy to have you check out more reviews and things like that on the site. One of the things with the site that I think I've always wanted to go back and do is clean up a lot of different things that have kind of gone wrong with it when I started it. One of the things when I first started it, of course, I was just getting images from wherever I could on the internet, right? I wasn't actually taking my own screens. So, a lot of those early posts, they just have random pictures that I grabbed from wherever I could. So that's one piece of it, right? Is sort of maybe changing that so that I can get actual, 3 images for each post at the least, especially if those movies are available on streaming or something now. So that's one piece. The other piece, of course, is when I started putting my own images up, I was using PhotoBucket. And, of course, PhotoBucket, one of the most egregious bait and switches in history. I mean, absolute crooks, that company was. They kept touting, oh, we're free to host. Yeah, host your stuff on here for free. And then suddenly, nope, no, you got to pay money. You got to pay. And if you want, originally it was like, you got to pay an exorbitant amount of fee if you want your images to even show up on the sites that you've linked them to. And then they changed it to, well, now you can see them, but there's going to be a watermark, right? So many of my posts in the past have images that have watermarks, right? Now, if you click on the image itself, it takes you to the image page where you get a watermark-free post. But essentially what I've got to do with those posts is I've got to go back, delete the HTML code, and just upload the image itself into Google, into Blogger. So a lot of work there with that, right? But that's something I would like to do just to make the blog look nicer. The other piece, of course, is the links, all of the really bad links to Matt Movie Guy sites, right? Because I, again, when I was on that hiatus, my debit card expired, and I got a new debit card in that period, and I had registered the domain Matt Movie Guy through my blog email account. And so when the company emailed me to say, hey, we're not able to process your payment because the card's no good, you need to give us a new card, I wasn't checking that email. And then the next thing I knew, it's too late. And of course, somebody bought it right away and linked it to some crap site or something like that. I don't even know what it is now. But anyway, so there's so many links on the site that are no good, if you click on them. Because at the time, I went through this process, right, of just linking, anytime I mentioned a movie, right, I would link to that movie's review, so you could go back, you could just click on it and see that review. Or if it was an actor, for example, I would click on his tag or her tag, so you could go to their, you could see what other movies of theirs I'd posted or whatever. And so, really, what I probably did is just remove all of those that HTML code from all those. And so, it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of stuff that I've got to do there, and I just don't have the energy for it. And so, another thing is to get the archive back up, right? I took the archive down just because I wasn't keeping up with it, but also, again, they were all Matt Movie Guy links, right? And so, the archive was just all Matt Movie Guy links, and it was like I have to change all of them to dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com links, and so it's just a huge mess. And so, but one of those things, where especially the situation here, where I'm getting all of these people coming to see the site, from this Outlaw Johnny Black post, they're looking at other posts as well. And of course, those posts have broken links. They have images with watermarks on them. They're all a mess. And so, and I think if I was ever going to, trying to do Google AdSense or something like that, I think the fact that the site is such a mess would make it harder to do that. So, stuff that I'd like to do, kind of make the site a little bit better. And I think part of it too is that the Outlaw Johnny Black thing is kind of reminding me how big the site is compared to the other things that I work on. My novels don't sell anywhere near as well as the views I get for the site. The podcast doesn't do anywhere near as well as the site does. I've got, almost 1,250 reviews up. So it's like those reviews are constantly generating views because, people, there's 1,250 possibilities for somebody to stumble upon that review, either by searching online or seeing the link on IMDb or something like that. So it's constantly generating traffic, and it's just the thing is the traffic just doesn't go anywhere else, right? It usually just goes right to the review. So something I'm looking at doing, and I don't know if maybe this year I might start to undertake it, something like that. But it's one of those things where it's like I look at my what free time I have, and it's like I could start working on that, or I could watch another movie for the podcast, or I could start to work on that, or I could write the rough draft of a novel or proofread a novel or something like that. So, something that I probably do need to do at some point. I need to fix that at some point. But yeah, just, energy wise, it hasn't been there. So we'll see if maybe next year that will come. All right. Well, yeah. Now, speaking of which, as we're about to wrap up here and get into the meat of the podcast, Quick mention about my novels. Don's House in the Mountains is available on Amazon and in paperback and Kindle. It's $4.99 in Kindle, $12.99 in paperback. You can pick that up. The link will be in the podcast description, or you can just go to my author page, MatthewPoirierAuthor.com. You can find links to all of my novels there. And so always appreciate the support on that. And also, too, if you've bought a copy recently and you want to shout out on the podcast here, let me know. Because, like I said, right now, people have bought it, but the only one that I know of is John Cross. So again, thank you to him. He's always good about picking up the newest one. So thank you to him for picking that up. But if you've bought it and you want to shout out, let me know, and I'll definitely mention it on the podcast here. So why don't we do that? We'll take a break here. We'll let John from After Movie Diner and Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures play in our theme song here, and then we will start with Bloodfist VII. All right, we are back, and we are going to look at Bloodfist VII, Manhunt, which, according to the IMDb trivia, this was originally just supposed to be Manhunt, and it was later kind of released under the Bloodfist branding, which, who knows what it matters either way. It feels like a Bloodfist movie in the sense that it is Don the Dragon Wilson against the world. So in that sense, it kind of follows with Bloodfist IV, Bloodfist V, and what will happen in Bloodfist VIII. It kind of definitely follows that theme. So even if it isn't it wasn't originally supposed to be a Bloodfist movie, it feels like what those Bloodfist movies ended up becoming. So we'll give a quick synopsis here. So Don Wilson, he's back. He plays a character named Jim Trudell. He is, I don't know if he's on the run. He's just kind of traveling, but he looks like he's going to Mexico or something. Goes to a dive bar where he's actually accosted by Rick Dean. If you remember Rick Dean. Rick Dean was in Bloodfist III. So he's back here as a biker. And, he ends up getting into it with Wilson, and then later when Wilson goes into the dive bar, he meets Jillian McWhirter there, who looks very pretty, and of course the dive bar, patrons, including Rick Dean, they hit on her. Bar fight ensues. Don the Dragon, beats them up, and he and Jillian McWhirter they escape. They go to a hotel. In the morning, he wakes up and she's gone. She's stolen his car as well, but he finds her car, and he takes her car, and he's trying to find out where she lives. So he goes to her house. He kind of sneaks in and discovers an off-duty cop there ransacking the place. They fight. Wilson throws him through a glass table, which we know from Seagal movies and most action films, that's actually not such a bad thing to have happen to you, but in this case, it actually kills the guy. And then the cops show up, and they're like, oh, you're a cop killer. We have two detectives. We've got Johnny Marvosa, and then Stephen Williams plays Captain Doyle. And I said when I reviewed this, and I still think this is the case, that the reason why Johnny Marvosa's name is, Jonathan Penner is the actor who plays it, but the reason why the character's name is Johnny Marvosa is so Stephen Williams can say Marvosa. And there are points where he's not just saying Marvosa, but he's even saying it almost like in this dejected kind of way, like Marvosa, and we find out that Marvosa, when he's taking Wilson to lock up, and then he and another cop buddy try to kill him because we find out that Marvosa's dirty. But he's that kind of dirty cop that is really inept too, right? And so it's kind of a fun dirty cop in that sense that yes, he's gonna indiscriminately murder people, but he's really not good at being a dirty cop. We also find out that Don the Dragon is a former Special Forces guy who's kind of on the run. And so the FBI has been looking for him as well. So that explains why he's been so much trouble for everybody. And of course, he's on the run now, right? He's both on the run and he's trying to figure out what's going on with the situation, trying to find Jillian McWhorter so he can, get his name back, get his life back, all of that kind of stuff. And it's just sort of that series, that cat and mouse thing. And of course, at the same time, Stephen Williams, at the same time that he's chasing Don the Dragon, he's also starting to piece together that Marvosa might be a little bit off, and so yeah, that's pretty much what you get there. You get your kind of your final fight at the end there, kind of a final denouement. And of course, everybody is in that situation of nobody is who they seem, right? And anybody could be potentially causing problems or something like that. In addition to Rick Dean coming back from Bloodfist III, we've got Michael McDonald is back. So he's been in every one of them, right? He's been 4, 5, 6, and now 7. Again, not the Michael McDonald, not the what a fool believes Michael McDonald, not that Michael McDonald. It is the Mad TV Michael McDonald, who's back there, right? So he's there. He plays. His character name is Running Officer, and what's great is like he's chasing Don the Dragon, and he runs out of breath. He's like, I can't chase him anymore, which was just hilarious. It's an absolutely beautiful thing to see in a movie. We also got Art Camacho as fight coordinator. He's back. This will be the last movie that he's fight coordinator for in the series, but we've seen him from, I believe, from 4, from 4 all the way through. So that fight choreography is really good there. Again, I think getting out of the bunker that we were in for part 6, being in more open spaces here, we get some better fight scenes here. We get some cameos, like we get Ian Jacklin is there, very small part. Thug with a gun is what his character name is. So he's got a very, very small scene, but he's there, and you always want to see Ian Jacklin in something like this from the 90s. Paulo Taka, he plays a Latin American assassin who's there to try to kill. He's hired by Marvosa, and I think this other character, played by Stephen Quadros, DT, they're hiring him to take out Williams before the cops get him, right? Because if the cops get him, he might be able to, he might spill the beans on what's happening there. And Stephen Quadros is interesting as an actor, right? Because he's like almost like a poor man's like David Shark Freilich. I almost thought he was David Shark Freilich the way he was dressed in this, but that's not who he is. And then I also love that we have an actor named Cyril O'Reilly who plays Tubbs. He's the friend of Wilson. He's like the guy who can get computer information and look up stuff. He's in a wheelchair. He's kind of not in the best shape, but he's willing to help out Wilson. I just love that name, Cyril O'Reilly. It's like sounds like a late 19th century magician or something like that, but regardless, he's playing Tubbs here. He also gives us one of those action movie tropes that I've never been a fan of. So spoiler alert, right? And it's not really a spoiler alert, because if you've seen enough of these movies, you know where it's going to go. So Wilson calls Tubbs, Cyril O'Reilly, and he's like, hey, I need some help. I need you to look up some information for me. You got to do da-da-da-da-da. I got to, whatever it is. And he's like, yeah, all right. First he doesn't want to get involved, but he's like, okay, I'll help you out. And of course, what that means is he helps him out. Wilson leaves, and then Marvosa shows up and kills him. And it just seems to be like this thing where if you help out the hero, you're going to die. It's just a common thing that buddy who helps out the hero is going to get killed. And it's just a shame that like so many of these buddies get killed in all these movies. And I don't understand what that's supposed to do as a trope in the film. Like how, is that supposed to make Wilson more heroic? I guess it makes the villains more villainous, right? And it makes the hero want to come at them more, I guess. I don't know. But I've never liked that trope. I've never liked that idea that like the person that's going to help the hero isn't going to make it through the rest of the movie. It's just a weird thing that action movies, and they all seem to do it. So anyway, we get that in here. As a movie, I think the interesting thing about this was one of my favorite Blood Fists. This is definitely up there. I think it's like right up there with 4 for me. And when Chris the Brain at Bulletproof Action asked me to kind of rank my Blood Fists and then also write about a Blood Fist, I had this one at the top, and I wanted to write about this. I was kind of the only one who offered to write about this one. And it's funny because when I first started watching it, it was kind of slow. It gets the bar fight, but for the most part, not a lot's happening. And I was like, was I right about this movie? Like, I don't remember. And then suddenly you get that scene where Wilson is fighting the off-duty cop in that nicely furnished mid-90s house, destroying all this like 90s furniture that was like holdovers from Very Brady Christmas in the late 80s, I guess, or something like that. But anyway, he's destroying all of that, and then Stephen Williams shows up and is just absolutely just killing it. And I think I joked when I wrote the blog post of it that he was like, the dad who sees the kids playing around the grill and he's like, I'm going to take this. I'm going to take over and start cooking the meal for for our cookout here, like that kind of thing. Like, I let you kids play with this enough, but dad's here. And it's almost like that acting style that he has where he's just so commanding in his acting presence. And then, of course, also, too, the movie really ramps up, where it's just like constant scenes of him fighting people, getting into fights, going, and so it just becomes that movie that you want it to be. Granted, 95, we're starting to get towards the end of that period where the best of DTV action was. This is sort of falling at the end of it here. And when we start talking about 8, and then we talk about 2050 in particular, we're going to be talking about where things fall off, right? But 95, we were still kind of there, right? And this definitely fits in there as like a fun, Friday night actioner to watch and just kind of joke about it, make jokes about what you're seeing on the screen, watch Wilson beat people up, do some spin kicks and stuff like that. It all still kind of holds in that sense, which I think sometimes it's just, what you're looking for, especially with a movie like this that's on Tubi. Just see this thing doing its thing. It's just a lot of fun. When you look at Wilson's bio, IMDb bio at that time, he is just pumping out a lot of movies, right? So, he had 5 movies. It looks like 5 movies in 94, and then in 95 he has another 4 movies come out. So 9 movies in 2 years, which is just, that's like Scott. We think of Scott Adkins doing something like that now, and it's like, wow, Scott Adkins, he's just pumping out so much stuff. But this was Wilson, right? And you just look at what he's doing. Granted, one of the movies he did in 95 was Batman Forever, where he was just a gang leader or something like that. He didn't have as big of a part in that. But the other ones, these are lead movies, right? He's the lead in Bloodfist V. He's the lead in Cybertracker 2, Red Sun Rising, Bloodfist VI, Bloodfist VII, Lion Strike, right? Lion Strike, man, what just an absolute, like, I don't know if banger is the right word, using the kids term banger, but just an absolute fun. Recently I was on Twitter and somebody was posting like best hospital scene of all time, and of course, I don't have the ability to make my own GIFs so much. I know how to do it. I know how to I could use like PowerPoint and do it, but it's just so much work to do it that I just didn't have the energy when I'm scrolling Twitter. But best hospital scene of all time obviously has to be, well, I don't know which is the best one, when Wilson is on the roof of the hospital sparring with somebody, and like some old guy in a helicopter starts hosing them down with Uzi fire, and then he shoots back at them, and he's like hanging off the roof and firing a pistol, and he blows up the helicopter. Or is it when he's doing rounds later? Because of course, you don't take the rest of the day off when that happens to you and you're down the Dragon Wilson. You still got to do rounds as a doctor. He's doing rounds, and a biker just drives his motorcycle on the floor. Like, just there it is. Zoom, and Wilson's got to beat up this biker. Absolute best hospital scenes of all time, I think, right there. Of course, I didn't have the ability to do the GIFs for that. It's not the same when you just say, oh, it's this scene, right? You got to have the GIF. People want to see the GIF on their Twitter feed. So I didn't have that ability to do that. But Lion Strike was just an absolute. And that's the thing, right? He's doing the Bloodfist movies, while at the same time he's doing the Ring of Fire movies, right? Because Lion Strike was Ring of Fire 3, and he's got the Cybertracker movies that he's doing at that time. So he's got like a lot of stuff that he's really, really there as a star. And, Bloodfist VII, I think, just kind of fits right in there. It just, it's like if you're doing a Wilson night, right? Bloodfist VII is a movie that I think you definitely want to have on your Don the Dragon Wilson night. It's quintessential Wilson. The faces he makes when he's getting kicked or when he's hitting people back, it's really, really fantastic stuff. Because you got to love a good Wilson face. Just the martial arts that he's doing in general. The scenes where McWhorter is like getting undressed and she's like lying next to him and stuff like that, and he's just kind of there with his shirt off, like looking at her like, oh all right, and he's supposed to be like more like seductive or whatever, but it's whatever, let's just go for it. Even when he's at the bar and like the bartender, because he doesn't want him there because he's not a local, charges him $5 for a beer. He's like, $5 for a beer, or whatever, and he pays it, which of course, here in Philadelphia, I don't know where I could go to a bar that doesn't have, doesn't charge me $5 for a beer. So, that's, 18 years later, right? Or I guess, what is that? 28 years later, not 18, 28 years later. It's, wow, so much longer. Inflation has definitely made beer more expensive, right? You can't go to a bike, and I don't know if I'd want to be going to a biker bar anyway. I don't have the martial arts skills that Wilson has to dispatch the baddies when they start giving me a hard time. It's more like I'll just move along to another bar. I don't need to go to the biker bar and deal with all that mess or whatever. But yeah, this movie sort of fits all of those bills there, and I think in that sense, I mean, again, for me, that's why this is one of my favorites of the series. I was trying to think where I'd rank it. I think when I sent the email out to Chris, I think I may have had this as number 1. I think in watching them through again, I like 4 better than this one. I still, I don't even know where I want to put 1 and 2 because they're just kind of unique ones in this. And 3, talking about 3 with John, that one just, I like that one again. I mean, one of my favorite prison movies, I think, ever. And so this is definitely slots in there with those really good ones. I mean, just watching these again, I mean, 5 was a really good one. I mean, this is definitely better than 6. It's going to be better than 8 that we'll be talking about soon here. But I almost have like a new appreciation for all of them watching them now because again, I hadn't seen these since the late 2000s when I reviewed them for the site. And so at that time, and at that time, they weren't all easy to get. At that time, one, you didn't have in the late 2000s, early 2010s when I first started doing this, you didn't have full movies on YouTube like you do now. You had like the pieces, right? The 10 movie in 10 parts or whatever. And like that's what I always talk about when I did my MST3K episodes, right? I would do them in parts and people would check out the parts or whatever and comment on them and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of what you had to do at that time. But then also too, like Netflix, they had stuff, but some of these things were not quite in print or in print the way that they should have been. I think one of them I had to get like from Galesburg, Maryland. I was living in Maine at the time when I was getting those. So, these weren't as easy to get. And now all of them except for 2 are on Tubi, and the 2 that aren't on Tubi, that's I think it's 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are on YouTube. So you can at least get them on YouTube and watch them that way. So, I mean, you could check all of these out at once, which I think is a fantastic thing, that these are that available now. They should be. They should be available. They should all be on Tubi, really. You should be able to watch any of them at any time. This one, for sure, it kind of gives you, I don't know, it's watching it this time through, I could almost kind of feel the end of an era kind of thing, like the sort of the calendar turning. And it's interesting because I know, talking with like Brett from Comeuppance about when the 90s started and that kind of thing. I've always kind of thought that the 90s start when Clinton is elected, or maybe that election year of 92. You could even push it further back. Maybe it's like when Clinton plays the saxophone on Arsenio Hall or something. And of course, these are all American references, right? I'm sure, where you would think the 90s would start in another country might be slightly different, but from an American standpoint, it feels like that Clinton election was a big time for it. And you get some other pieces along the way. You get the OJ trial, the OJ case. That thing was huge and sort of took up the bulk of the 90s. I remember going to England and Scotland in 97, and I remember sitting in the bar in 97 talking with some older folks that were there, and they brought up OJ. And it was also one of those things where it was like, we don't want to bring up OJ, right? We don't want to talk about it. We talked about his death, but we got a couple of Americans here, and we want to pick their brain about what they think about OJ, even if we were only 18. They wanted to know. But that's, I think, 95, you're kind of like right smack dab in the middle of where the 90s are becoming the 90s. And it's an interesting thing, because I'm going to get into this a little bit more when we talk about Part 8, because that one's in 96, and that one feels like a completely different time from where this movie is. You look at Gillian McWhorter's hair, right? When Gillian McWhorter, when we see her at the end, her hair is just like big. It looks like something from like 90, 91 as opposed to 95. And I think it's supposed to kind of make her look more respectable and older, because her character is a lady of the night, right? So there's supposed to be this idea that as a lady of the night, she's a little though it's interesting, she's a lady of the night, but I think she's supposed to be more of like a high-end lady of the night, like an escort of some sort of, maybe a Heidi Fleiss kind of thing, which would make sense from the time, right? I think this was around the time of the Heidi Fleiss Madam scandal, so it could have been, kind of sort of dovetailing with that a bit. But anyway, you see her hair. Again, the furnishings in the house that Wilson goes into, a lot of it just all looks very earlier 90s, and it's possible this thing was shot in 93, 94, and had more of that feel that by the time we got to 95, and I think of 95 myself. I was 16 in 95. I remember I got my first job that summer. It was the same time I joined our soccer team of our high school. And it was one of those things where it was like, I ended up having to quit the soccer team because I just started the job. And it was like, I want to make money, right? Like money is, but you want to be the friend that had, all my other friends had jobs and they had money. So I wanted money. But, think about how music was at that time, right? Like where you were kind of transitioning from grunge and, hair metal had been completely done by this time, but grunge had kind of transitioned out to this like almost like what I think they called it modern rock, but it was like a more like pop version, or I guess a more, going back to the Marvel conversation, a more big tent version of grunge, right? Where you had like Goo Goo Dolls and Gin Blossoms and Matchbox 20, Third Eye Blind, groups like that were kind of more on the radio. I remember Take That's one. Back for Good was on the radio around that time as well, which was big, right? Because that was like the start of what would become the boy band movement a few years later. So music was changing, looks were changing, all of that kind of stuff was starting to really mold itself into what we would think the 90s are. And so here in 95, we're still kind of in that early 90s phase. This thing feels like something from a few years before, which is kind of an interesting thing. And I think going through this whole catalog of movies, it's kind of interesting to see that this movie here that was made in 95 doesn't feel that tonally different from the first movie that was made in 89. And so, to go 6 years and have, from a clothing standpoint, a music standpoint, cars, all of those things, not really feel that different in 6 years. And then when we get into number 8, right, when we'll be talking about that one feels completely different. That one feels like the late 90s. It feels like we're closing in on the 2000s. It has more of that sensibility to it. And I think that's one of the things that I liked about Seven so much. I was looking at some of the other movies that he did around that time. He does The Lion Strike in 94, same thing. It feels more tonally like an earlier 90s movie. Virtual Combat. Virtual Combat's hard to say because it's just, it's a sci-fi futuristic movie. But, some of these other movies that he did around that time, Bloodfist VI, of course, obviously same thing, feels like an earlier 90s kind of thing. And so, it kind of makes you wonder, I think part of it is when they make these movies, they kind of just spit them out. And so if you do like a bunch in a short period of time, they can all kind of feel like they're from the same time period, even though they're maybe, made over a certain period and they're released over a certain period. And who knows, maybe even too, like from a Corman standpoint, maybe the wardrobe, they hadn't revamped the wardrobe yet, or they were going to at some point or something like that. And so everything still looks and feels like that early 90s thing. That's something I really like about this movie, that it tonally has that vibe to it. Going back to the Wilson aspect of it, there, as much as I think I was talking about Stephen Williams as an actor, where he's like, he kind of comes in and takes over, there's also still very firmly the sense that Wilson is the hero here, that he's the take charge guy here. And I think that's an important piece when thinking about Wilson in these 90s movies, that he always had, I know people talk about the it factor. It was always there, I think, with him. And, what we'll talk about when we get into number 8 and kind of, where he went from there, what happened with him. But that it factor never really went away with him. And I know, obviously, he's older now. He probably can't do a lot of the stuff that he did in these movies back then. But when he was in the screen, when he was on screen, when he's sitting at the bar, at the biker bar, you're just waiting for him to dispatch a whole bunch of these biker guys. It never felt like he was being forced on us as the hero, right? We always just kind of went, it was always easy to buy him as the hero. And I think that's one of the ultimate things that makes him such a great DTV action lead. And this movie, I think maybe more than any of them, really, really drives that home, because we don't get a lot of backstory on him at the beginning. Later, they start talking a little bit about how, he was this guy, he was that, he was special forces, all that kind of stuff, and we kind of start to see it a little bit more. But initially, it's just kind of, hey, let's just wait for Don the Dragon Wilson to beat up everybody in this bar, and we'll sort out why he's able to do that later. And so, I think looking at it as we get into number 8, I think that'll be really interesting when we look at number 8, because that's where things really, really shift for him, is after, kind of post number 8, where he's still making movies, but not at the same clip, not the same kind of stuff as this. And it's, it kind of fuels to this point where he kind of, starts to kind of fade out, and then, of course, we lose him completely for 4 or 5 years, and we never really quite have gotten him back to the same degree that we had him at this time. And so it's almost kind of, it's a little bit bittersweet seeing him in this movie, because I don't want to say this is his last really great movie. I think, looking at his bio, this is definitely, for me, I think, Terminal Rush is one that I really enjoyed him in, but in Inferno, of course, that was one that I believe that's the one that Fred Olen Ray directed, where he it's got Evan Laurie in it as well. That one was just a fun one. It's a lot of fun. I don't think it's as good as this movie, but it is a lot of fun. And that's kind of maybe his last really fun one. That was in '97. One you can check out on Tubi for sure if you want to. I think Mitch from Video Vacuum and I actually covered this. We were talking about Fred Olen Ray and Jim Wynorski in the same episode. So we did Inferno, and then we did his Revenge, or was it Revenge of the Swamp Thing or Return of the Swamp Thing? You can definitely check that one out in our archives. That was a really fun episode that we did together. But yeah, that might be kind of where we get our last really, for me at least, my last like really fun or great Wilson film. He does other stuff after that. Inferno's only '97, but kind of the gap between this one in that the '95 and '97. He still pumps out a bunch of movies, but. Yeah, we kind of still get enough Wilson, right? It's still enough Wilson there. I think it's one thing I would say, if you look at that late 90s stuff, there isn't the sense that it is going to fall off a cliff or anything like that. There's a sense that he's just going to keep being Don the Dragon Wilson, that maybe it's a bit of a lull period. And we know, all of the guys, all of the big names have gone through lull periods. We know that Dolph, had a period around the same time, actually, kind of late 90s, early 2000s, where his stuff wasn't that great. And what he ends up doing, right, is he ends up starting to direct more of his own stuff. That was, it was kind of a way that he kind of took charge of his career that way. And we never really see Wilson do that. He doesn't really go behind the camera too much. And then, also, as we start to get into the early 2000s, that's where we start to see Van Damme and Seagal move into more DTV. And so that's the other piece, too, is that you wonder how many of the scripts that Seagal and Van Damme got in that early 2000s period would have been scripts that Wilson would have gotten. And so that's another part of why we start to see, him start to fade, where he's doing things like The Last Sentinel, he's doing Crooked, Sci-Fighter, when before, he's doing, whether it was Manhunt or Bloodfist VII Manhunt, whatever it was. This is, a Bloodfist VII Manhunt script, which, that's like it's the greatest script ever, but you feel like, in 02, 03, that script is going to Seagal or Van Damme, right? Unfortunately, and it's not going to Wilson. And I think that's probably part. And we're going to talk about why he goes on hiatus there. I think that's part of it, is that he gets a lower tier of movies, and it's a shame, actually, because I think some of those Seagal and Van Damme direct-to-video films, whereas Seagal and Van Damme saw it as they were slumming a bit when they did those movies. And some of them, they put in really great performances. But overall, I think there's a sense of like, hey, I was once this big screen star, now I'm doing direct-to-video stuff. You're lucky to have me kind of sense. I think Wilson would have done more with those movies. I think, Cynthia Rothrock's another name that, similar situation, right? That she starts to fade out in that early 2000s period, not getting the work that she should have been getting. And I think it's another, she's another casualty to that. Gary Daniels is another one, that they start to lose out. And, Dolph Lundgren also was one who lost out on that period when those bigger names started doing direct-to-video stuff. He wasn't getting the same roles, but he was able to transition in a way that the other ones weren't. And I think mostly because he had that big screen pass to hold on to, right? That he was Ivan Drago, he was He-Man, Masters of the Universe, and so those were things that even saying he was the Punisher, even if it wasn't a big screen film, he could lean on that a little bit more. That Wilson, Rothrock, and Daniels didn't have that to lean on. So. Anyway, so I think it's, maybe a good place for us to wrap this up, because then we're going to kind of get into more of the stuff with Bloodfist VIII. So, why don't we do that? We'll take a break here. But, Bloodfist VII, I think final word on Bloodfist VII. This is one of my favorites of the Bloodfist. It's one of my favorite Wilson films. And I think if you're thinking about doing a Wilson night or, do a few movies, a film fest, something like that, Bloodfist VII should be on your list. It's one you should definitely add and watching there, because I think everybody that's watching with you will have a fun time with it. So I think that's probably a great place to leave it. So we'll take a break and we'll come back with Bloodfist VIII. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and now we are looking at Bloodfist VIII, Trained to Kill. I was going to say Forced to Fight. Which one was Forced to Fight? I don't remember. But anyway, Bloodfist VIII, Trained to Kill is what we're looking at here. So it is like Bloodfist VII. It was originally just supposed to be Trained to Kill. It wasn't supposed to be, or actually, it was supposed to be called Hard Way Out. That was the original title for it. Wow, I didn't realize that. So it was Bloodfist VIII Hard Way Out was the original title for it. And actually, that's what you see if you go on the on IMDb when you look at the cover. That's right. I completely forgot about that it had two titles. So it was originally Hard Way Out, and then it became Bloodfist VIII Hard Way Out or Bloodfist VIII Trained to Kill. So it has all of those different names there. Interesting. I didn't even think about when I reviewed it, what title did I give it? So I did Trained to Kill or Hard Way Out. So I did, I did one or the other. And actually, the cover that I had was just called Hard Way Out. So when I first saw it, I actually saw it on Spike TV. If you remember Spike TV, so in America, right, the way it worked was there's the Nashville Network. It was a channel that had country music programming, and they at one point, I guess, because I think they were bought out by Viacom, which owns MTV, VH1, CBS, kind of all that stuff. And I think they wanted more male-oriented programming. I think they essentially wanted a male version of the Lifetime network or the Oprah's O network or something like that. So, or OWN. I think maybe her network was called OWN. But anyway, they wanted to make it their own version of it. So they changed it to Spike TV. And they would have all kinds of action-oriented stuff on. So, they would have Bloodfist movies. I think I saw Rage and Honor 2 on there. I think I remember watching that with my dad, Rage and Honor 2, where Richard Norton at the end is beating up. I can never remember the actor's name. I want to say Patrick Bergman, but that's not his name. I always do this. I don't know why. I can never remember his name. And somebody's probably listening to this right now going, "Oh, I know his name. It's such and such." He was on all kinds of stuff. I mean, he's did tons of tons of 90s nighttime soaps. He played Josie Bassett's boyfriend on Melrose Place. Patrick Muldoon, that was his name. Patrick Muldoon. I don't know why I can never remember his name. I always want to call him Patrick Bergen or something like that. But anyway, he did all kinds of TV dramas, TV movies that here in the U.S. He actually did his own Willis film as well, right? So he was the young guy doing the heavy lifting, which he was born in 68, which so he wasn't that young when he was the young guy doing the heavy lifting. But Deadlock came out in 2021. He was the young guy doing the heavy lifting there in that movie. So anyway, I remember watching that with my dad. And you remember the end of Rage and Honor 2 where Richard Norton is chased Patrick Muldoon up on this ledge kind of thing, and he's beating the crap out of him, right? And he's I can't remember what the character's name was, Bobby or something like that. What was it? Of course, I tried to look it up. Tommy, Tommy was his name. Yeah, one of those kinds of names. He's like, "Come on, Tommy, let's go, Tom. Show me what you got, Tommy. Come on." And he's just beating the crap out of him. And my dad was even watching, getting into it. It's "Yeah, come on, Tommy. What do you got, Tommy?" And so I always remember that just a fun experience. But that was Spike TV, at that time. So these kinds of movies would be on there. Some of the Seagal movies that I remember, the Seagal direct-to-video movies would show on there as well. I don't remember what happened with Spike. I think it went away at some point. It just kind of went under, I think. I want to say Spike also, similar to TBS, Spike would have Siddhar's movies on 1, 2 in the morning, which was always great. There's always something about that at 2 in the morning, I'm wasted, the room's spinning, I'm eating cold burritos or something like that, and there's that the title cards of like one of the Sedaris movies, like Dallas Connection or something, and you see like the names, like Bruce Penhall, Julie Strain, Donna Spear, kind of float across the screen in that typeface that Sedaris used, especially like in the later movies. There's something comforting about that. Like I just knew I was in the right place where I needed to be at that time. Always enjoyed that. But anyway, that was how I first saw this movie. Was on Spike TV, and so. And I don't remember. I think it was listed as a Bloodfist movie when I watched it on there. So I guess it was, Hard Way Out, Train to Kill, something like that. And then it was just repackaged as a Bloodfist movie for the, for American video audiences, which makes sense, right? Because, for me, obviously, because I wanted to do every Wilson movie, I would have done this eventually, right? I mean, I did what's it? Something Safari. What was it called? Hollywood Safari. I mean, I did that movie. So if I did Hollywood Safari, I'm probably going to do whatever they called it, whether it was a Bloodfist movie or not. But anyway, that was the deal. Basic plot. Wilson is a school teacher. He's got an estranged son. Sorry, just wetting my whistle there. He's an estranged son, and the son, obviously for whatever reason, Wilson hadn't been around, and the mother dies, so he's now taking over. So he's the teacher at the son's school. The son is played by an actor who is roughly, so the kid is supposed to be my age, right? So I was born in 1979. This movie came out in 96, probably was shot in 95. So, myself, I would have been a sophomore in high school. I was 16 years old at that time. That's who this kid is supposed to be, right? I don't think he drives, so maybe he's not old enough to drive, so he might even be younger than that. But the actor is John Patrick White. He was born in 72. So he's like 25 when they're making this, and he definitely does not look like a high schooler, especially in a lot of the scenes. He's definitely someone older than that in those. But anyway, some of the baddies, there's like an Italian hit squad that's trying to kill him, and because he helped kill a mafioso at some point, and so he realizes he's got to go on the run. So Jillian McWhorter from the previous movie, not the same character, but Jillian McWhorter is back. She's really the only thing other than even, I would say even Wilson, she's really the only thing that really anchors us to the Bloodfist series, because Wilson, his hair is different. It's very late 90s like skateboarder dude hair, kind of like that façon look. I never had that look exactly. I know I did. That's not true. I did. When my hair would grow out, it would kind of grow into that look. So I kind of had Wilson's hair. There's probably some ID photos and whatnot that had Wilson's hair from this movie in it, but it's not the hair that Wilson has in the other 7 movies, right? It's a different hairdo. The look and the aesthetic of everything is very, very 90s. It's probably one of the reasons why they wanted to get out to Ireland as soon as possible, so we could sort of take this thing out of the late 90s where it was placed and make it be something else. The fashions, the kids' fashions, the adults' fashions, Wilson's hair, his fashions. Jillian McWhorter, right? Again, we talked about the movie that came out a year before this, where she's got like this big poofy early 90s or late 80s, early 90s hair. Suddenly she's got like bangs and not quite a Rachel haircut, but something closer to that. This movie tonally feels like something completely different from what the other movies are, except for the fact that we've got this Wilson against the world approach. So Wilson gets out to Ireland. He's got a friend that he trusts who has a castle out there, which the castle that he's in, I swear, I think I've seen that castle on reality shows when people go to Ireland for things and they rent the castle out. I almost think that's like, it's like the same kind of thing, which kind of makes sense. Whenever I think of a castle in Ireland, of course, I always think of J.P. Dunleavy's novels. You had Darcy, Dancer, Gentleman, and then he had like what was the other? Was it Elsa or Ella? He had like a series of books, like 3 novels based on this kid who was like became like it was like an aristocrat in Ireland, but of course like the family had no money. The castle had no electricity. Like it had siblings that didn't treat him. It was like a whole interesting set of stories. I've read the first 2. I haven't read the third one. It took me forever to find the third one. It was called That Darcy, That Dancer, That Gentleman. I think I had to get it shipped from, a used copy shipped from England. It took me forever. So if you're not familiar with J.P. Dunleavy, one of my favorite novelists, he wrote The Ginger Man. That was the book he was most famous for. But some other really great ones that he did. Fairy Tale New York. He did the Beast, the Beatitudes of Balthazar B, which was a fun one. So, and I just read one recently, Schultz, that he did. That was a really, really, really fun one. So, but yeah, Adventures of Darcy Dancer. That's another Darcy Dancer gentleman. That's a great one to read if you ever get a chance. I remember this used bookstore, not used, but a discount bookstore near where we lived in Kittery, Maine. So we had all the outlet malls. The outlet mall there, it had a series of or it had, selling books that were there I guess that other bookstores didn't want anymore. And so there's a whole bunch of Donlevy books and a whole bunch of Iris Murdoch books, which I think her most favorite novels were either Under the Net or The Sea, which The Sea, my most recent novel, Don the Dragon Wilson, has a lot of influence from that novel, The Sea. But that's how I got into both of those authors. Just, I think that the bookstore used to be next to where the Burger King is in Kittery, Maine. And so I remember going in there with my mom and just seeing books and be like, oh, wow, look at J.P. Donlevy. I'd only heard of him through, him being on the top, Modern Library's 100 books list and, for the 20th century. Ginger Man made that list. I was like, oh, let me grab all the Donlevy I can. And then same thing with Murdoch. Her Under the Net made the top 100 novels of the 20th century. So I was like, let me grab all the Murdoch I can as well. And been fans of both of them ever since. But anyway, seeing that castle just reminded me of his work and especially that series of books there, which is really good. So anyway, in the castle, there's a guy who's like one of those people that has access to all kinds of computer stuff and a lot of information. And so he's helping them, but then of course there's that situation of who can you trust, who's going to backstab who, whatever. Anyway, the baddies get a hold of his son. At the same time, they frame him for killing people. So he's been arrested. His son is being held on a boat somewhere, and now he's got to get his way out, talk his way out of the prison and get on that boat and save his son and take down the baddies. And so that's really where it is. That's what's happening there. But of course, again, it's all kind of more in a late 90s feel. In 1996, it really is amazing how much this movie and the movie from 1995 that came out just before this, how they feel so different in time. They feel like they were made 5 years apart as opposed to 1 year apart. Which was really fascinating. And of course, myself being someone who lived it, and of course, being a kid at that time, right? Of course, I would have been more up on fashions, right? So it would have been even more stark for me it's more stark for me thinking about it now to see those differences. So I guess, where is this series going at this point, right? I mean, obviously, this wasn't meant to be a Bloodfist movie. It was meant to be an action movie with Wilson in it, but then it just had the Bloodfist name kind of slapped on it. At this time, he is still making these movies with Corman, right? Because this is another a New Conquered Horizon movie. But Inferno, of course, which comes out the next year, is also a New Conquered Horizon movie. So. He's still making movies with them. I think Capital Conspiracy, which comes out a year after, I think was also another New Conquered Horizon movie. So there's that piece of it there too. That's right, because that was the other one that Fred Olen Ray directed. So that one comes out a year after. So he's still kind of making movies with them, whereas at the same time, right, I guess he's still kind of making stuff for PM as well, right? Because Hollywood Safari was a PM flick. But he's his star's starting to fade a bit, which is amazing how quickly that happened. That this is going on. Now, the other thing too, right, that I should mention is that there's a movie, Moving Target, right, that comes out in 2000. That one is also shot in Ireland, right? And so it's almost kind of think of those two movies together. It's almost like, how do you want to say it? And the funny thing, right, about Moving Target, right, is it's a remake of Bloodfist IV, right? So again, Corman just completely recycling these titles, right, these movies. So it's a remake of Bloodfist IV. But the other thing too, I guess, Moving Target was the last one he did with Conquered New Horizons, and so that one, that was like the last of that kind of that era there, and so that's in 2000. But it's interesting. Almost like how Moving Target and in this movie, Bloodfist VIII, they almost feel like they could go together, right? And as opposed to it being another Bloodfist movie. It's interesting because when I go back to some of the other movies that he does in in that period, right, where we talk about we talked about Inferno, talk about Capital Conspiracy. Those kind of feel, yes, his hair is longer when we get to Inferno, so he's kind of like growing out a little bit in Bloodfist VIII, where he's got kind of that more facade look, and then it gets bigger, right, for other ones like Hollywood Safari and things like that. And I guess like the other thing too, right, is that Night Hunter. He has longer hair for Night Hunter, which comes out after Bloodfist VII. So he's growing his hair out a bit. But anyway, what was this? But like Inferno feels more like kind of that earlier '90s, even if it was something that came out later. It feels like an earlier kind of movie. And, this thing definitely, it was striking to me. I think it's because I saw them all at once, right? Because I watched all of the Bloodfist essentially over a matter of weeks, but I saw them all kind of together to see how this one stood out from the rest of them and felt like something really, really different like that, which was, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of fascinating to see that there. And so, but, it is also that sense of like, that sense of, where Wilson is going, right? Where his career is moving at that time. And, I don't know if he was seeing a wave crest, right? I don't know. I mean, it seems like he was still getting, he's still getting a lot of the parts, right? He's still getting parts that aren't coming as fast and furious, right, at that time. And I think you could make the point that Wilson, I think the good thing for him is that he took advantage of all the chances that he had, right, and the fact that he was making so many movies at a time. But I guess I'm saying like the movies weren't coming. I mean, he still made 3 movies in 1998, but when he's making the 3 movies in 1998, right, they aren't the same kind of movies, right? I mean, Whatever It Takes, right? You can think of that movie. Fred the Hammer Williamson movie there that he did. Obviously, Capital Conspiracy was another one of these, and then Paper Trail, right, where he's like, I think that was like a serial killer movie. Very different from when he's doing Blood Fists and Ring of Fire movies and Cyber Tracker and PM flicks mixed in with Conquer New Horizons. It's by the time we get to this 96 movie, I mean, yeah, PM was still making movies, but he wasn't making them with them, right? He does Hollywood Safari. I'm sorry, does Hollywood Safari in 97, so it's not completely true. But, he wasn't getting the big action roles with them, or he wasn't doing as many of those movies with them. It's very interesting to kind of see, like, sort of where, I don't know, where this movie fits in his career. We started watching him in '89, right, when we started this series of looking at these movies here, with the first Bloodfist in '89, and we've come 7 years, right? It's just 7 years between '89 and '96, and already we can kind of start to see the wave cresting, right? With the amount of roles he's getting, the kind of roles he's getting, it's already starting there. But I think if you were at that time, right, in 96, if I was watching this movie in 96, which I wasn't, I don't remember watching it in 96. I think it was, again, I saw it on Spike TV in the early 2000s. You wouldn't be like, okay, well, we're going to start seeing less and less of Wilson, right? You wouldn't have been that thought. Yes, it might have been like, okay, maybe we're getting a little bit of a law of diminishing returns here. There's a little bit too much Wilson stuff. Eventually he's got to stop at some point, or he's got to do less at some point. But where this thing ends up going, where he just starts getting fewer and fewer stuff, and the stuff isn't anywhere near of the quality of this stuff, right, that he was doing here. Yeah, I think the only explanation I can think of is that it coincides with when the other big names start to go DTV. If you think about, like, Seagal has The Patriot in in the late 90s. Like right around the same time as this, right? That's when The Patriot comes out, and he still had that one last gasp, right, where he did Exit Wounds, and that was a big box office hit for him. But really, he was going DTV at this point. Van Damme. I remember I was around the same time, right? I think it was 97. I actually took a date to see Double Team. So I don't know if you remember Double Team, the movie he did with Dennis Rodman, which I was a huge Dennis Rodman fan. I loved it. I mean, I always kind of love those kind of anarchists when it comes to sports, because sports is like so, like, it's so buttoned up. I mean, you think of like Michael Jordan, who played on those same teams with Rodman, right? Or even Scottie Pippen, right? Or Steve Kerr, or any of those players, right? They're on those teams. Bill Wedman, whatever. To see Rodman there was just like, I don't know, that kind of anarchy is something I just really loved. And So he was one of my favorites. So seeing him in that movie, it was just exciting to be like, oh, and the movie itself was not as great as it could have been. But I think it's one of the few times I saw Van Damme on the big screen. But, so they were starting to dip, right? It's almost like the whole action thing was starting to go in a different direction already, which is amazing to think about, right? When we think of how great action was in the late 80s, early 90s, that we were already starting to kind of dip a bit. But you can see it, like if you look at Seagal's career, so 98 is The Patriot, right? So 2 years after this movie. He tries it out with Exit Wounds, gets a little bit of success there, tries it again with Half Past Dead, doesn't work, and that's it. Foreigner, Out for a Kill, Belly of the Beast, right? This is like, '03, that period of time there. Same, with Van Damme, you kind of do a similar thing with him, right? Where, again, Double Team, I remember being in the theater. That was, I want to say it was 97. I think I was still in high school at the time when I went to that. So yeah, Double Team was 97. Knockoff, right, with the explosive pants is 98. Legionnaire, for whatever Legionnaire was, kind of a, whatever that was. And then he tries One Last Gasp the same way that Seagal did the One Last Gasp, right? He does Universal Soldier of the Return. It's more him making that movie, right? And it's in 99, so it's a little earlier than Seagal's Last Gasp with Exit Wounds, which comes in '01. So they're both starting to feel it, right? Van Damme and Seagal are starting to kind of feel like the bottom's kind of coming out of this whole action thing for them. And I mean, he does, Van Damme does Inferno, which is technically a PM flick, right? It's produced by the PM guys, and I mean then it's Replicant. The Order had like a small cinematic release, but yeah, I mean Derailed, In Hell, he's kind of fallen off at that point. So you start thinking about some of these roles. I mean, something like a Derailed, right, in '02, or looking at like The Foreigner, maybe Out for a Kill. I don't know about Out for a Kill. And the other thing too, of course, when it comes to both of these guys, Seagal and Van Damme, is it's hard to imagine what the script would have been that Wilson would have gotten, because both of them would have been requiring like multiple rewrites of something. But Wilson at that time, right? He's got Redemption with Chris Penn. Not the same kind of movie, right? Not the same kind of movie as Derailed or something like that. Sci-Fighter, right? You remember that one? Crooked with Art Camacho was directing. That was in '06. Because also too, right? He's not doing as much stuff, right? He does Redemption in '02, Sci-Fighter in '04, Crooked in '06, right? So now the parts are shrinking, right? He's not getting them as often. And of course, what ends up happening ultimately with him is there's a R. Ellis Frazier film, The Line. Now, I always get these two confused because he has two movies that came out around the same time, The Line and then La Linnea, The Line, or something like that. I don't remember. But anyway, one of those movies was supposed to go to Wilson. And what they did is they ended up being able to get Ray Liotta attached to the project. And when they did, they rewrote the movie and completely wrote Wilson out of it. And so this was in '09. So it looks like it was The Line. Yeah, so the other one was called The Line, Linnea, and then the other one's Across the Line, Exodus of Those were the two movies that I was getting confused. So The Line comes out in '09. And it was supposed to... it was written by Art Camacho, so I think that's part of the reason why, because Camacho and Wilson worked together for so long in the the 90s and the 2000s, and what ends up happening was that when they get Liotta on board, they completely rewrite the movie and write it for Liotta, write him out of it. And so Wilson ends up taking a 5-year hiatus. He doesn't do anything. So that's where we get our last film from him is The Sentinel, right? Which was a early Jesse V. Johnson movie. I think I remember seeing that, The Last Sentinel. I think that was like I don't know if it was a sci-fi original, but I remember seeing it on sci-fi. But that's in '07. He says he takes a 5-year hiatus, but actually the only thing he does in 2012 is he does a short, and he has a very small part in the short called The Liberator. It was a short film that actually, if you go back to the Short Shots episode that I did with Rich Hawes. So when Rich Hawes was on over the summer, we did an episode called Short Shots where he curated a list of about 10 short films because they're DTV Digest. They do shorts all the time. And so he curated a list of 10 shorts, and Liberator was one of them. And so Wilson comes at the very end of that. So that's in 2012. He also has a very small part in 2015's Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power. I mean, very, very small part. So it's yes, he it was a 5-year hiatus, 8-year hiatus, but really, I mean, he's come back now, but he's not really doing like these big movies that he did before. I mean, I would say Death Fighter in 2017 might be like the closest to something where it's like a really, really big thing. Where he did that one with Matt Mullins, but Matt Mullins did, he and Matt Mullins almost like kind of more of like a team up kind of movie. I haven't seen some of the other ones. I haven't seen The Hitman Agency. I haven't seen Diamond Cartel. Ty keeps telling me to watch Diamond Cartel. I've got to check that out. But then, of course, probably his best thing really since the hiatus was the voice work he did on New York Ninja, which was just fantastic all around. That whole thing was just really great. And so to see him as doing the voice work for that, I think was fantastic. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about this movie comes out in '96. And he does a good amount of stuff right between '96 and 2000 with Moving Target, but it's not the same volume. It's not the same stuff. It's not, it's not Lion Strike. Again, you can pick out a few here or there, right? You can pick out Inferno, as one. Whatever it takes, I think you can take that one either way. I think that one, it's kind of a fun one, but it's something different, right? It's not the same kind of thing. It's more of an ensemble cast, right? Where you've got Williamson, you've got Andrew Dice Clay, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess, it's just, I kind of went off on a huge tangent there, but I think the biggest thing, again, just going back to this point of like between 89 and let's say this movie in '96, right? Wilson is one of the biggest names in the sort of the DTV action world and just the action world in general. I think for my friends and I that grew up as action movie fans, he was there. He was one of those names. And then when I started doing the site, when I started doing the blog, and I started picking up Wilson's films, right, wanting to review them and realizing how many there were, I think I started to kind of see a little bit more of this, of like, okay, these later '90s ones are sort of falling off a bit. But there was also still a sense of like, well, why is he not still doing stuff? Like, why, again, if you think about it from my standpoint, where I went on hiatus in 2014, so there was that mention of The Liberator as a short, but really it wasn't like they were pumping anything else out. The other interesting thing about his bio, right, is if you go in the early part of his bio, there's always sort of an up and down of like what films of his were his, or what like these sort of low budget movies in the '80s that he did like in the Philippines, stuff like that. Which ones had him in them, which ones didn't. One that I can say for sure has him in it. If you find this one on YouTube, it's New York Chinatown. It was his first film that he did. It came out in 1982. It's a Hong Kong film that's shot in New York City. He is fantastic in it. He plays a kind of a corrupt cop. It's amazing because we talk about him not being the best actor, but playing a baddie in that role was absolutely fantastic. So if you get a chance to find that one, I definitely think you should check it out. Anyway, I kind of went way off also on the movie. I kind of went way away from the movie. There's some interesting pieces about this movie, I think, maybe to discuss just in general. So the son, Wilson's son, again, he's played by somebody who is in his mid-20s playing a high school kid, but he's like kind of this tech-savvy kind of tech wizard kid, and he does this thing where he booby traps his radio because he knows these bullies want to steal his boombox, so he booby traps it, and when the bully goes to hit the play button on it, it zaps him with this like blue electricity, like I don't know, like effect that was there. Looked hilarious. Looked like something like Yahoo series. You'd seen like a Yahoo series movie or something like that. And they actually bring the effect back later in the movie when he plants a bomb on somebody. The same thing. It does the same thing. It does that same like, or maybe it was something else. I can't. Whatever. They bring that electricity effect back, which was kind of a trip. So yeah, I mean there was that there. I think from a fight standpoint, I think this movie does suffer a bit from not having Art Camacho as the fight coordinator. The fights were still good. They were still really, really solid. Art Camacho, though, was the next level guy, especially at that time, especially in those the 90s there. And I mean, he still is. I mean, if you go to his IMDb, sorry, not his IMDb page. If you go to his Instagram page, he'll show like footage of him, when they're shooting movies and stuff like that. I mean, he's one of the best as a fight coordinator. And so whenever you lose someone of that caliber, I'm sure, there's probably a sense that like between Wilson and then, the guy that they ended up getting for it, which I can't remember his name. I think it was the guy who ends up playing, who ends up, and I think I completely lost my Bloodfist VIII tab when I started opening up stuff all over the place about, Wilson's career and Don the Dragon Wilson and Seagal and all those people. But anyway, the actor Emmerich Pressburger, I think he might have been the one. Donnie Hare actually is the actor's name. The character's name was Emmerich Pressburger, but Donnie Hare is the one who does the fight choreography for this one. So again, it's not that he's bad. It's just that it's not that next level kind of thing that really anchored those earlier Blood Fist movies. And so that's another piece too, is that the fight coordinator does matter, I think, to a large extent. And if you lose someone of that level, those are hard shoes to fill. And I think Donnie Hare does a good enough job. I think these fight scenes are good enough, but they're not the next level stuff. And of course, you also don't really have like the same level. I mean, Seven didn't really have anybody of that level either. I mean, you like get Ian Jacklin in a scene here or there. So I mean, you get some people, but I mean, it's not like when you're seeing Steve James, when you're seeing Gary Daniels. When you're seeing, Camacho as a bit part, getting into a fight with somebody, this is not that you don't really see anything of that level here. And again, I think the movie suffers a little bit from that. I mean, again, and some of the other things, like I don't know why it was filmed in Ireland, and I do kind of wonder if this and Moving Target were filmed at the same time. I couldn't find any information on that, but there is a part of me that thinks that like maybe that was the case, that they filmed two movies at the same time and they just didn't get Moving Target out until later, and maybe that was the plan, was to film those two together. And maybe when they ran into delays with actually though, when I'm looking at Moving Target, like trying to think back to it, I mean the hair is not really the same, right? It's not the same hairdo, so maybe not. Maybe he just went back to Ireland and filmed another movie. Who knows? I mean, maybe that was something just where Corman just saw that was a place where they could afford to film, that it was a little bit cheaper to film there or something like that. But because I mean, Moving Target could just as easily be a Blood Fist movie. I mean, there's a few in there, right? Black Belt is one that could just be a Blood Fist movie. Capital Conspiracy could be a Blood Fist movie. So there's a lot of ones that they could just slap the title Blood Fist on them, and Moving Target's one of those. But for whatever reason, I guess they decided with Part 8, that they would just slap it on there and go for it. But I guess they wouldn't have been filmed at the same time. Just again, looking at the hair, I guess that's a good way to be able to tell is Wilson's hair. I was reading recently about how forensics using hair to like tie someone to the scene of a crime is not really great science. And I guess it's maybe like you can see right now where I'm doing it, right, where I'm saying like, well, his haircut's not quite the same, so it can't have been done at the same time or whatever. But anyway, so I'm kind of going off track there. But yeah, I mean, I think as a Blood Fist movie, now that we've gotten to the end of it and we get to that eighth movie, and you think of sort of where this franchise kind of started and went from, where it was originally almost like a take on Kickboxer, right? Where Wilson's character goes to avenge his brother's death. And I mean, that storyline, that plot line gets used a lot, which is going to be used again when we talk about Bloodfist 2050 here in a little bit. It gets used a lot. Corman seems to really like that plot as well. But we go into this thing where it's like, okay, Part 3 wasn't supposed to be a Blood Fist movie, but they decide to rebrand it as a Blood Fist movie because the first two did so well that, okay, let's try doing that. The other ones, I don't know about 4 and 5 if those were, and I didn't see anything about. I looked up 6 because I was curious, like, was 6 not really supposed to be a Blood Fist movie either? But there's sort of this idea of, it's almost like, I don't want to say like. It's almost like Tales from the Crypt or something like that. Like it's almost like the Blood Fist like theater or something like that, right? Like where these movies, they're called Blood Fist, right? But they're not really. They don't follow each other, right? There's no thread that pulls them together other than the fact that we have Don the Dragon Wilson. But it's almost like, you could call them like if you had like a movie series called Blood Fist Theater, right? And you just had these action movies with these plots that are pretty. I don't know, pretty cut and paste or whatever, paint by numbers. That's kind of what these end up being, which is kind of a fascinating thing. Because when we think of like action franchises, for the most part, right, the action franchises have some kind of thread where the movies connect on some level. I mean, I guess right when we did the Kickboxer movies, that's probably a really great example, right, where you have a big screen film. And then you have sequels that tie to the big screen film by saying that the actor is the brother of another actor. So we still have the characters from the first movies, which is, there's like some thread that ties them together. After part 2, there is no thread that ties them together. And so it is a fascinating thing. I mean, it kind of gets into Corman's mindset when he comes to making movies, right? That he recycles script ideas, he packages things together that don't necessarily go together. He uses names and titles that would work to, to package things. And I guess when you're a kid going to the video store and you're like, okay, I saw Bloodfist I and I really liked it, and then it's like, now I'm a teenager in the mid 90s and I'm at the video store with my friends and we got somebody to buy us beer and whatever, when we're looking for a movie to watch. Like, oh, yeah, that's another Bloodfist movie, Bloodfist VIII. Well, let's see what that's about. That could be interesting. It kind of works in that sense, right? That he kind of knows what he's doing there. But thinking about it in terms of like it being an action franchise, it kind of isn't, right? It's I don't know. It's a franchise that has the same actor, but there's not really anything franchise about it. You think about like Vin Diesel, who's like goes to like painstaking work to retcon movies so that they fit into the series. I mean, Tokyo Drift really didn't have to have anything to do with the other movies, but he made it have something to do. I mean, part of it was that everybody liked the Han character, right? So he wanted to bring him in somehow and do that. But it's when you think of the best action franchises of all time, the Bloodfist one, I think it has to go in that it has to be in the conversation. But then someone could easily counter with like, well, what kind of franchise is it, right? When there's no connective thread between the movies, when it's just Corman slapping the Bloodfist title on different ones so he can get better distribution deals. Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. And so in a way, it makes it even more fun as a DTV franchise, right? That they don't have any connection to each other and that just the titles slap together like that, which is something that I always really like. I always appreciate that kind of thing. So maybe that's a good place to sort of leave this thing, right? That we're kind of leaving two things here, right? We're coming to the end of the 90s, right? We're seeing Don the Dragon Wilson's career starting to kind of not fizzle out, but it's not going the kind of full steam ahead that it was in the early 90s, right? Because we're seeing other names like Seagal and Van Damme come into the DTV space and take roles that he might have gotten before. So there's that piece, right? That's happening, right? Late 90s, PM is starting to wind down. He's still doing movies with Conquered New Horizons, but not quite to the level that he was before, right? They're not kicking out 3 or 4 movies a year with him like they were before. So that piece is happening there. DTV action as we know it is starting to change as well, right? That the budgets that were used to blow things up in the early 90s aren't there coming into the late 90s, right? And we're going to see PM is going to be, PM's got a few more years left and they're going to be done. Conquered New Horizons, so obviously Corman is still around, but his action movies are going to change in terms of like the quality and the budget that he puts behind them. You're going to start to see the big studios get into the DTV world, and when they get into it, it kind of really, changes the mode as well because they're looking to get more bang for their buck. So they're cutting budgets, trying to just get as much as they can for as little as possible. So that's changing it as well, and I think that's also a place where someone like a Wilson can get frozen out. And again, this kind of all comes together over the next 13 years, right? Where in 2009 he thinks he's going to have a role, and the movie ends up being written away. He ends up getting written out of it, and they give it to Ray Liotta because obviously Ray Liotta is a bigger name, right? He's Ray Liotta, right? You can't, but that ends up being what happens there. Is that he is, he gets written out. And I think he kind of sees the writing on the wall and says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. It is our loss, though, I think. In 2009, he's only in his 40s at that time, which, we look at names that are in their 40s now. Like Scott Adkins. I mean, they really can still bring it, and he still could bring it at that time. The fact that he went on that hiatus, and he went on that hiatus for a long time, right? He says 5 years, but he barely did anything in that short film in 2012. So we essentially lose him completely after that happens, and we're getting him now again, but not to the same degree that we had him before. So there is a sense that in those years, those intervening years, granted, his last thing was in 2007, I think, right? So in 2007, he does The Last Sentinel, the Jesse V. Johnson movie, and then he was looking to do the the line La Linea or whatever, and he was probably working on that going into '09, but yeah, I mean, this ultimately, like we're kind of starting to see the sort of the downslope here, unfortunately, with Wilson. And yeah, it's a shame that we lose what probably would have been some really, really productive years from him, just because he was just disillusioned with it all. And it would have been interesting to see. It would have been interesting to see what he would have done with someone like an Albert Pyun, who was making movies, still at that time, who did a lot of great martial arts stuff. There are movies that people like Gary Daniels were doing that he could have been doing with him. So yeah, it's kind of a shame that it kind of ends up working out that way. But we can, with this movie here, we still got some years. Some good years left with him. I guess it's like 11 years and, however many movies. But yeah, this movie really, I don't know, it struck me very much as like a turning point for a lot of things, between the fashions, all that stuff. I mean, I know from my own experience when I play the music choice channels here in the United States, I don't know if the rest of the world has this, but our cable company has this thing called Music Choice. And it's like a channel on the cable that just plays music. And it'll play it based on a theme. So like you can do 80s music choice, and it'll just play music from the 80s. Or you can do 90s music choice, and it'll just do new music from the 90s. And one of the things I noticed is that the 80s music choice, I mean, yes, they have a tendency to play Sheena Easton's I Take, My Baby Takes the Morning Train song. They play that one way too much. I could do without that. But for the most part, there aren't a lot of skips, right? Like most of what I'm hearing in the 80s, I enjoy it. I get to the 90s, though. It's like, you get to that period in kind of the late 90s where stuff is just not quite, it just doesn't sound as good, right? You get Diddy, right? Where Diddy was great when he was producing Mary J. Blige or producing, Biggie. But when he was producing his own stuff, right? Like the Godzilla song and stuff like that, it was just like, think about I'll Be Missing You, stuff like that. Like, this wasn't really that great, and then there was like a lot of other stuff from that period. It's just, music's starting to go at that point. And I can tell there's also a change in me where I'm not as into it as much as we get into the late 90s. And this movie had that feel of like, okay, me about to graduate from high school, going to college. Things were different in the late 90s from what they were in the early 90s. And I guess I never really thought of it before, but also, with direct-to-video action movies, that change was happening there too. There's more skips in the late 90s when it comes to direct-to-video action movies than there are in the early 90s. So, and this movie kind of reminded me of that. So, yeah, well, I guess what we're going to do now is we're going to take another break, and then we're going to wrap up by talking about Bloodfist 2050, and then maybe kind of do maybe like a wither the franchise thing and see, where we can go from there. But yeah, we'll take a break right now, and then we'll be right back with Bloodfist 2050. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we are going to wrap this up by talking about Bloodfist 2050. So this movie comes out in 2005. I remember when Chris the Brain asked me to help out with the Bloodfist series that they were doing for Bulletproof Action, I said, do you need me to rank Bloodfist 2050? Because I hadn't seen it yet. And he was like, no, that one doesn't count. We don't count that one as part of the series. So, okay, that sounds good to me. It has been reviewed by some others in our ecosystem. Ty and Brett from Gwalpitz reviewed it. Mitch, Video Vacuum, reviewed it. And also Simon from Explosive Action, he reviewed it as well. So thinking of Mitch and Ty and Brett, if I review it, it's going to be like a complete the triangle film, as I say. So whenever the three of us do a movie together, it's a trifecta, and then if Bulletproof does it as well, it's a superfecta. That's the way I always look at it. So if you look at a lot of action movies, especially low-budget action movies, a lot of times the four of us have all done the movie. So it's a real interesting thing to check out, to see how many movies all four of us have done. When I say four of us, counting Time Brett together as one, because it's their one site. But anyway, so what is Bloodfist 2050? It is the plot that Corman just can't stop rehashing, right? So it's the same as the first Blood Fist. It's the same as Full Contact. It's the same as another movie that I haven't seen yet called Dragonfire, which came out in 1993. And actually is closest to this one because it also takes place in a future post-apocalyptic LA, only it takes place in like 2035. This one takes place in 2050. So instead of Wilson, so we don't have Wilson this time around, we've got Matt Mullins. He is coming to 2050s post-apocalyptic LA to see his brother, find out his brother's been murdered. So, he wants to find out what happened to his brother, and of course, same deal. He's underground fighting. There's a cop this time who's the one who's training him. And of course, we know the cop probably killed the brother. So it's just a matter of us getting there. At the same time, we have an actress played by Beverly Lynn, who did a lot of low budget, I don't know, Skinamax movies, like not quite hardcore porn movies, right? But kind of more just like, the TNA kind of stuff. A lot of stuff directed by Fred Olen Ray, actually. She plays a stripper, which if you remember in the first Blood Fist, right, the actress was a dancer, right? The woman that he fell for, and of course was the sister of the guy, right, who was helping him out. This days, Randy, right, is helping him. It's his sister, right, that Matt Mullins falls for, and but anyway, yeah. So she's a stripper. There's one really interesting dance routine she does where she's she's topless most of the time, and she just kind of like rubs like some kind of cream on herself. I don't know if it's moisturizer, because usually moisturizer starts to go away as you rub it into your skin, and this was just kind of there. Looked like some kind of soap or something. I don't really know what was going on there, but there are a lot of like long striptease. I mean, this is like, in terms of an action movie, and this is the most TNA that you get out of any of the Blood Fist movies, right? There's a lot of boobs in this, a lot of thongs, a lot of skin, a lot more skin there than you get in the other ones. The other ones, it's like, I think the closest we really get is like Jillian McWhorter in her underwear in part 7, maybe. Like, we don't really get that much. This is definitely there. I mean, these are like long extended strip scenes, and for a movie that's only 78 minutes long, right, there isn't a lot happening in it because it's either stripping, scenes of strippers dancing, or fight scenes, right? So once Matt Mullins' character gets involved in the fight scene, he's, in these underground fights where he's fighting people. Joe Marie Avellano, from the first 2 movies, he's back as the MC. Almost a little bit of a redemption for him because he's kind of a good guy, but we don't know that. We don't know for sure how good or bad he's going to be. But yeah, he's there. I mean, the movie itself is directed by Cirio H. Santiago, so he, of course, DTVC Hall of Famer. We haven't seen him in a while on the site. I'm trying to remember the last time we did one of his movies. So, I mean, eventually we're going to do this movie. So, eventually we will see him again. But, in terms of directors, he got into the Hall of Fame, I think, just because, I thought of so many movies. We only have 10 tags of his, so he's kind of lower for a Hall of Famer. But remember seeing so many of his movies, in the video store. So actually, we did do Firehawk, one of his movies. So since I've come back from hiatus, we did that 3 years ago. Movie with Martin Kove. So it hasn't been that long since we've done one of his movies. I thought it had been longer than that. But and we also did Silk. So actually, we have done some of his stuff recently. But the thing I always remember about Cirio H. Santiago, my first experience with Cirio H. Santiago, and it actually dovetails with this movie, which is kind of funny. The first one that I did was, or the first time I remember was Dune Warriors. And so what happened was I met my friend Petrowski. We had French class together. So, of course, we were sitting near each other because his last name is Petrowski, mine's Poirier. And, we kind of hit it off. And, we went and saw Wolf together. He brought a wolf mask with him when he went there. So, so we were hanging out. We were, he's coming over for a sleepover party. This is like, we were like freshmen in high school. So we're still kind of in that mode where you still do sleepovers. But, instead of like, doing more innocuous, the kids that we were doing like prank calls and stuff like that, probably getting into more trouble. But anyway, I was like, he's a big sci-fi guy, so he probably likes Dune, So I saw Dune Warriors, and I was like, oh, this is perfect, he's Dune. And he's like, no, that's not the same Dune. That's not the same thing. So we watched it, and we were like, man, this movie is horrible, right? And we were still getting into that mode of really enjoying this kind of lower budget stuff, so we didn't really know what to make of it. You watch the movie and it's just like this post-apocalyptic thing of like people being like, grenades blowing up and people being shot with like pneumatic catapults or whatever. It's just kind of all over the place. So one of the interesting things about this movie, right? Because that was my first introduction to Syria and Santiago, and then of course I kind of when I started doing the site, I realized how many movies he had directed that I from like that one that I had seen, and just realized like wow, he's done a lot of really great stuff. I'm going to put him in the Hall of Fame. I think he belongs there. He's as a direct to video director, he's definitely up there as one of the greats. So this movie actually, at the beginning, it actually cuts in footage from Dune Warriors. So he's driving around this Matt Mullins is driving around this post-apocalyptic wasteland with like a car with like a spiked front and all that stuff. That's all footage that he's cut in from Dune Warriors, which was really great to see. Yeah, I mean, the movie's really low budget. I mean, which when you compare it to those early '90s movies, you can see. I mean. Yes, there are movies that were made. This movie was made in 2005. Yes, there are movies that were made in 2005 that look better than this. So it's not like it's just because it was 2005 and it's so bad. But you could see I mean, the level of quality of any of the other Bloodfist movies compared to this, it's like night and day. I mean, there's a lot of dubbing in this movie, a lot of really bad audio. The special effects or the script, the locations don't look as great. It's just not anywhere near on the level of the other ones. Of course, we have Matt Mullins here, and watching Matt Mullins play the lead here, and of course, I'd seen him in the movie that he did with Death Fighter that he did with Wilson, right? And I think that was interesting because you get to see the two of them together in a movie, right? And he is a really, really great martial artist, right? I mean, he is next level when it comes to the martial arts, which I think, at least on that level, I think, should give him, he should get more parts as a result of that. I mean, looking at his IMDb bio, he hasn't done a starring role since 2017's Death Fighter. I mean, he's done like some like TV stuff, like he was in an episode of Magnum PI, but he hasn't really done much, and he hasn't really done much before 2017's Death Fighter either. It's like a lot of uncredited fighter, that kind of stuff. But when I saw him here, I think there's two things. I think I liked him as the lead. I think he could be a lead at some point. I think he's got the skills to do it, but he doesn't have the natural it factor that Wilson had. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why that is. That right away when you see Wilson that he is the star and the lead. And Matt Mullins doesn't quite have that. I don't know what that is. I mean, maybe he needs more roles where he's like the second. I mean, you think of Gary Daniels. I mean, he did some leads right off the bat, but then he did a lot of movies where he was sort of second in command to people and then kind of, grew into doing more leads. I mean, maybe that's what it is. Cynthia Rothrock's another one who she got her chops in Hong Kong, with smaller roles, right? Playing second to people like Michelle Yeoh, Sammo Hung, people like that. Maybe that's where it needs to go for him, because he's got the skills, and you don't want to. I hate to see that kind of talent go to waste, especially. I mean, he's born in 1980. He's only 1 year younger than me. So again, thinking about that age kind of thing, where you get a lot of guys that are older now doing this stuff, but like to see him doing. More of this stuff, right? People should be writing scripts for him, and he should be getting the leads in things, and he should, kind of be making a name for himself as that kind of star. I think the problem is this is not the movie, right, to be your first big one, and I think this was his first one. I think it was his first. Yeah, it was his first lead role. This is not the movie for that to be, right? There's not a lot of support for him in this movie. Again, compare it to the first movie that Wilson does, right? The first Bloodfist movie, where it's kind of like the whole new, conquered New Horizon apparatus is behind him. You've got big names like Vic Diaz and Joe Maria Villano, which, I mean, Joe Maria Villano is in this as well, but very small role, right, compared to what he was doing in the first Bloodfist movie. So I think that's a big piece of it, right, is that for Matt Mullins, he needs the right role. And I think Death Fighter was a better one. I think it was a better, role for him to have. But I don't know. It was better, but it's still, it wasn't clicking quite there with him as okay, this is the next lead. This is the next guy. So excuse me. So I think he should be. I think Matt Mullins should be in that category of. I mean, again, the martial arts is there, So he just needs, he needs the parts. And I don't know how it works. I don't know why, people wouldn't be giving him scripts. I mean, it might be that it's like even worse now with like all of the old names coming back trying to do stuff, that it's even harder for a newer name to get parts. That could be why like people like Tony Sheena are making their own stuff. So that could be part of it as well. But I think what I was expecting when I was watching this is I was expecting to be like, oh, Matt Mullins, man, he's no Don the Dragon Wilson. It was like, it's not going to, it doesn't work with him. And that really wasn't the case. I mean, yes, he's not quite the level of Don the Dragon Wilson, but I think he could be. I think he's got the skills to be there. I think it's just a matter of getting the parts and getting the roles and having it more. I mean, granted, too, certainly from an age standpoint, right? He's born in 1980, so in 2005, he was only 24 at the time, which you compare that with Wilson, who was born in the mid, I want to say 54, right? 1954. So he's 35. Wilson was 35 when he did the first Bloodfist movie. That 10 years is a big difference in terms of just maturity and in being able to play those parts. I mean, granted, yes, Van Damme was doing roles when he was a lot younger. Dolph was doing roles when he was younger. But also, I think Seagal, right? Seagal was in his mid-30s when he was doing his first stuff, too. So, I think, I don't want to say he was over his head here, but this was, if someone his age for this to for whatever was going to be his first movie, it needed to be something that had more behind it, so he could, I don't know, he as an actor needed more support. He needed a better movie for it to be his first movie. But I don't think that should preclude him from getting more parts. I think as a lot of the big names are getting older, I think someone like a Matt Mullins is someone who could be in doing a lot of stuff. And I think think of names like Amy Johnston, who's starting to get should be getting more stuff. Seeing the two of them do a movie together. I mean, Mullins and Johnston, they could be kind of a new Rothrock and Richard Norton, right, for the sort of the 2020s. I think that would be really great to see that kind of stuff, and that those should be places where people are going for that kind of stuff. But I think I also get it too, like with Matt Mullins, where like, yeah, I'd be like, oh, get him in something and have him do it. But then it's like, well, Tony Jaa wants to do U.S. direct-to-video stuff, right? Iko Uwais is doing, USA direct-to-video stuff, and then it's like, so, those are bigger names, right, than Matt Mullins. So, maybe we're not going to bother with him. And it's almost like he's getting it in a different way, right, than what Wilson got in the early 2000s, right, where he was starting to lose roles to the bigger names. Matt Mullins, in his case, it's like those bigger names have been holding on for so long that he's not getting the roles he should be getting. But hopefully that will come, because I think if anything this movie shows is it shows that he's good enough to do that. So so that's definitely there. Interesting. Beverly Lynn, who plays the girlfriend, the girlfriend and then the sister of the other guy, right? That's her part. And it turns out she's married to that other guy, the guy who's supposed to be her brother in this. They're married. And it's also, if you look at the credits, her name is listed as Beverkey Lynn. So it's misspelled, which I'm surprised the movie. I'm surprised whoever did the IMDb for it didn't put as Beverkey Lynn as opposed to Beverly Lynn. But yeah, she's someone who definitely a lot of kind of softcore roles for her. So she was an Eagles cheerleader. I think she's from the Philadelphia area here, based on what it says here. But when you think of sort of like the woman in the Don the Dragon Wilson, in the Bloodfist movies, right? She's a very different version of that woman, right? She's not Gillian McWhirter. She's not Denise Duff, right, or Amanda Weiss, or any of those, right? It's a very different, different kind of actress here. This is someone who's along the lines of like a, Julie K. Smith, from Siddhar's movie film, essentially, and it is interesting to think, like where, in her case, she's still doing stuff. She's doing like really, kind of the kind of stuff that I guess Tubi wouldn't pick up, and I don't know where you find it. But it's it's like Fred Olen Ray kind of stuff. Fred Olen Ray is directing a lot of this stuff, and it's like movies that are like an hour and a half long that probably have softcore porn kind of things, a lot of boobs, a lot of nudity in them, and I guess they're the kind of things that just don't. I don't know. They're the kind of things that I guess don't. They're not going to be on streaming sites, right? You're not going to find them anywhere. So where you find them, I don't know. I don't know where you'd get some of these movies. I don't know, I don't know where you get, Hot Wives. That's one of the ones that she's in. I don't know where you find that, or Jailbreakers, or whatever. Those ones. Some of them are on a Prime Video channel that they have. It's like midnight viewing or something like that. Something along those lines where you can find some of those. But I mean, I remember growing up, right, that you would see those movies on like a pay-per-view channel. So you had like the pay-per-view channel, and in addition to the what do I want to say? The pay-per-view channel, in addition to like the premium channel. So you had like HBO, Cinemax, right? Which Skinemax, we talked about. They would have a lot of these kinds of movies. But then, when cable shifted to on demand, you could like rent them on demand for like $5 or something like that, or they would come included. Like, so for example, when I first moved out of my parents and had my own apartment in the early 2000s, I had Cinemax, and then Cinemax on demand had its own like Skinemax section. I don't remember what they called it. Part of me thinks that they called it Skinemax, but I don't think so. I think it was like its own like Cinemax, like after hours or something like that. Right? I don't know if Cinemax ever leaned into that term Skinemax like that, but these kind of movies would be on there, and so that's the kind of stuff that she does. That's the kind of movies that those are the kind of movies that she makes. I think one of her quotes, right, is that she says, "I love working, love being an actress, and if there's nudity in it, who cares, right? I'd rather be working actor and support myself than waiting tables trying to be an actor." So I guess that's a good point, right? That, you do nudity or not do nudity. You might as well just go for it. It's interesting. She said she was a cheerleader from '98 to 2000 for the Eagles. So of course, I went way before I moved here, right? I moved here in 2013. But I was trying to think of, from the team standpoint, where they were at that time. If that was kind of in that time where they were like going to the AFC or the NFC Championship like multiple years in a row. But not winning, not getting to the Super Bowl with Andy Reid, who's the coach of the Chiefs now. He was the coach of the Eagles. I want to say I don't know at that time. I think that was when they had Ray Rhodes as their coach. They hadn't gotten Andy Reid yet. I want to say, but I don't know. I can't remember. Or maybe Ray Rhodes was coach of the Packers. I don't remember. But I should have a better memory of that kind of stuff, but I don't. But anyway, she was an NFL cheerleader before she got into this kind of stuff. So. Yeah, but I think it's one of those things you sort of get like, a lot of these movies that she did, also the kind of things you'd see on USA Up All Night at like the 2 a.m. block or something like that. They'd be heavily edited, right? There wouldn't be a lot to them, but they would be in that section there, and so yeah, she's doing this movie, which. Again, Fred Olen Ray, I think, he did a lot of movies for Corman, so it might make sense that you'd kind of put all that stuff together. But it's interesting that you have Cirio H. Santiago directing this and directing those scenes. And I wonder, too, because he had some second unit directors in this, and I wonder how much they directed those scenes, because some of them look completely bonkers. Like, there's the one, I don't know if it's the one where she's dressed up like a school girl or something like that. It's something like that, but they use all kinds of effects on it. It's just kind of all over the place. I mean, again, this movie is all over the place. It just takes a script that was in a previous movie and then just kind of just does whatever for however long. 78 minutes. And then the movie ends and we realize that we're still in this post-apocalyptic wasteland where he just hops in his spiked car with his leading lady and they drive off. It's an interesting idea, right? And I guess, the movie it was originally called Street Fighter 2050. I think that was another name that it had, or that's what its title was. So I wonder if this was another one where Corman decided, I'm just going to, sort of decide I'm going to slap the Bloodfist name on it and see if I can get any blood out of that stone. It had been 10 years since the last one. So... it's always interesting to think about these reboots after however many years. I mean, we talked about this with the Expendables, right? The fourth Expendables. Why did you come back and make another Expendables movie 10 years later? This is almost like, well, we made this movie. Let's just call it a Bloodfist movie and see what we can do with it. Maybe see if it would have more success or more, And I mean, to be honest, I mean, the only reason why I'm talking about it, watching it, and discussing it is because it's got Bloodfist in the title. Probably the only reason why it's on YouTube, right? The only reason why there's a copy of it there is because it has Bloodfist in the name. So in that sense, it worked, right, by slapping Bloodfist on it. So, I don't know, I mean, kind of maybe this is a good place to transition to sort of wither this franchise. What could you do with this? And again, because it's unique as a franchise in that sense that these movies don't really connect at all. I mean, this movie has zero to do with the other movies. It's really just a remake of the first one set in some post-apocalyptic 2050 or whatever. They could easily just start making Bloodfist movies again, right? I mean, and then again, Matt Mullins might be the one to be the lead. I mean, I talked about Michael Jai White. Like, you could just recycle the scripts that you use with Don the Dragon Wilson and make them with Michael Jai White, and again, just call them Bloodfist, and I don't even know if you use the same number or just do like the Sniper, right, with the Snipers franchise where it's like Sniper something, you could do it that way. So Bloodfist, and not give it a number, but just say, Bloodfist, Forced to Fight or something like that. I do kind of wonder. I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, that like nobody has thought to do that yet, because in this like massive sea of streaming stuff, there really it's one of those things where it's like anything you can do to make your movie like stand out in any kind of way, right? You think that people would glom onto that, and especially Corman, right? You think that by just redoing Bloodfist movies that he would that would be his goal, right? That he, it'd be a way for him to, I don't know, to make more streams, right? It seems like a natural fit. Now, granted, Corman is almost 100 years old, right? He's born April 5th, 1926, so he's a fellow Aries like myself. I was born April 1st, not 1926, of course, 1979, so much further in the past. But, the last movie that he produced was in 2021, a movie called Jungle Demon. He also produced Abduction, the Scott Adkins movie. He has a movie called Crime City that he's looking to produce, but and of course, as executive producer, I don't know to what extent he needs to be available to do things, but it does kind of surprise me that, like, I'm looking at, like, kind of, obviously he was dealing with the Death Race franchise. He does a Death Race 4, Death Race 2050. He's got all those things that he was making, but he never thought, hey, maybe I should just start slapping Bloodfist names on some more of these titles. And granted, I could see in 2005, right, that maybe he thinks, okay, we've done enough for Bloodfist right now, let's leave it. But when we get to 2015, maybe that would have been, I'm surprised he didn't say, like, okay, let's start using Bloodfist in some of these. It seems too easy, right? It seems too obvious. And I mean, he's still, producing a good clip in the 2010s. I mean, it's like a movie here or there. In 2014, he had a few movies. I mean, Operation Rogue is one that I reviewed for the site. That was a Mark Dacascos movie. I mean, again, Operation Rogue would have been an easy one to slap the Bloodfist name on. I mean, Mark Dacascos would have been another name that they could have rebooted Bloodfist with. But again, if you go with this Bloodfist theater idea that I was pitching, you could have anybody, right? You could have Dacascos in one, Mullins in another, Wilson now, right? Wilson's back making movies again. You could have him back in there. So, so there's that piece of it. It's interesting because, the Death Race movies, right, where they were rebooted, right? They had those Death Race direct-to-video movies. So they had the first one, right, that had Jason Statham, right, comes out in 2008. So actually, only a few years after Bloodfist 2050, he's got Death Race, which was kind of a big hit, and that spawns direct-to-video sequels, right, with Luke Goss in them, right? We got Death Race 2, Death Race 3. It turns out there was a fourth one. I kind of stopped reviewing them because they were so long. I just, there's no reason that a Death Race movie should be longer than an hour and a half. And I mean, Death Race 4 Beyond Anarchy is an hour and 51 minutes long. Like, really, you need to do 2 hours of Death Race? Like, we can't we can't dial that back a little bit at least. But no, you can't, right? It's got to be that long. But it's interesting because it's got it was 25 critic reviews. I was going to say it has it seems like it has more kind of behind it. But one of the interesting things, the actress in it, Lucy Arden, she was in the movie Nemesis. That was a really good movie that I did. That was a Jonathan Southcott film with Billy Murray, his wife Jean Narissa Southcott. It was a really, really good indie film that came out, and yeah, she was in that movie as well. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if maybe he's thinking, like, okay, I'm going to kind of hitch our wagon to the Death Race thing and not have too many other things going on. I mean, it would be great if they did like a Death Race Bloodfist mashup kind of thing, right, where you put the two together. Would have been interesting. but I mean, they stopped making those movies in 2018. They haven't made another Death Race since then. There is the Death Race 2050, which I never ended up seeing, and I don't know if it's available on anything. It's got a ton of critic reviews. It was like kind of big there, yeah, I don't know. It's got Malcolm McDowell in it. It looks like it kind of could be an interesting one. It's only an hour and a half long too. Yancey Butler. Maybe I should try to track that one down. That could be interesting. But again, I'm kind of going off track here. I'm trying to figure out kind of like what, why Roger Corman wouldn't necessarily have done Bloodfist movies. I mean, think about some of the stuff that Roger Corman did. I mean, thinking about like the Fantastic Four movie that was never made. I mean, that would be a really fun idea for a Bloodfist movie, right? Is that, I mean, imagine that, like, right? So you've got Don the Dragon Wilson as Mr. Fantastic. You've got Cynthia Rothrock as, the Invisible Woman, right? Maybe that's who you have there. Matt Mullins as the younger brother, right? Doing the Johnny Storm thing. And then, who would you get to play Thing, right? You got to get some big burly guy who's okay with looking a mess there. I'm trying to think who we might do for that. I mean, Big Country. What's I'm so drawing a blank here, which is horrible. Let me go back to, because he was actually in Scorpion King 4 with Don the Dragon, so I can look up that name, but. He's a mixed martial artist who's like really, really great at jiu-jitsu. He's kind of like next level jiu-jitsu fighter, but just a big guy. I cannot believe I'm doing that. Roy Nelson, Big Country of Roy Nelson. I mean, Lou Ferrigno, right? Lou Ferrigno actually also in Bloodfist 4. He would be a great Thing, right? I mean, but you give them different names, right? So it'd be like, like instead of Mr. Fantastic, maybe like Mr. Unbelievable. Right, or something like that. Like instead of Invisible Woman, it'd be like Disappearing Woman. So like Johnny Storm, right, could be like Johnny Hurricane or something like that. And the Thing, right, could just be like Rockman or something, right? But it's Bloodfist, right? Bloodfist like Amazing Four or something like that. And it's like, I mean, and even like you could even give Don the Dragon Wilson like one of his like Bloodfist kind of names, right? Like I was trying to think of like some of his names that he had. Obviously, like Jake Ryan, right? That was the one that he had in most of them. But like Jim Trudell in Part 7, Rick Cowan, something like that. Like, right, like that's his name. I don't know. Like just going out there with the Bloodfist thing, but it's a franchise that. In this today, right, where it's like you got to slap as many names on the tin as you can, or people are biting on, they're using franchises to get as many streams as possible. I mean, even like you have like, thinking of Fred Olin Ray, you've got Sniper Special Ops that is really biting on the Sniper franchise, but has nothing to do with it. I mean, Bloodfist just seems ripe for this in this world, and so it does kind of surprise me that nobody has kind of picked it back up and are using it again, and again using it to remake Fantastic Four or something like that. But anyway, just using it to like sort of give action films a different, I don't know, sort of getting them to kind of. I don't know, to sort of lift them out of like kind of draw attention to them in kind of the sea of streaming stuff. It seems like it seems like a missed opportunity, and maybe somebody will do it. Maybe Corman is thinking about it. Maybe people are thinking about like bringing Bloodfist back. But I would love to see it. And hey, if you guys are curious, I've got plenty of ideas. I can just go back through the other Bloodfist movies and turn them into new scripts, because I think that's the best way to do it. It's just recycle those old stories and just bring them back and remake old Corman movies as new Bloodfist movies with names like Michael Jai White or again even Matt Mullins. I think I feel like the streaming world is ripe for that kind of thing. All right, I think at that point, I mean, I've talked longer than I thought I was going to talk about Bloodfist 2050 and sort of wrapping up the series, because we're over a half hour at this point. So over a half hour for this segment, I should say. The episode itself has gone longer than I was expecting as well. But it's probably as good a time as any to wrap this up. So doing my own plugs, of course, with it being a solo episode. DTVconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find links to everything. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you don't always see the links if you're viewing on a mobile device. So one thing you might want to do is when you page down to the bottom, you can see view on a web browser. Click on that. That brings up all the links if you're on a mobile device. If you're on your computer, you'll see anything everywhere. You'll see everything anyway. So you'll see links to the podcast, to my novels, my most recent one, Don's House in the Mountains. Also, Bainbridge. Bainbridge is the novella that I wrote about a detective in the early 90s, really kind of, tribute to PM Entertainment, Canon, AIP, short action novella or short action novel, about, 80, 90 pages, not really long. $2.99 on Kindle, $6.99 on paperback. Definitely worth checking out if you're a big action fan. But yeah, I think that is pretty much everything. And of course, I'm on all the major social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I don't use Instagram as much as I should. I don't know why. I need to start getting better at posting things on Instagram so people can see them. A lot of times, really kind of what I do is I'll go through and like some things, and then maybe like John from After Movie Diner, he'll mention about his VHS store that he has in Connecticut, Be Kind Rewind Vault, I think is what it's called, or Be Kind Movie Vault. But he'll post on there, and I'll share that onto my stories. Sometimes that's kind of maybe all I'm posting. I should probably post more about what we've got going on the site, because I think a lot of people do follow Instagram and check that out. But anyway, especially Twitter, Facebook, you'll find everything there. But yeah, I think that is everything. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk soon. Bye everyone.